I'm Alex Frank, and yeah, Joe Burrow and Zac Taylor have done some great things together, but unfortunately, they could be destined to decline in 2026. Jake Liscow, is Joe Burrow's prime being wasted with Zac Taylor as the Bengals head coach?
Well, they've certainly wasted a few years, but luckily Joe Burrow's good enough that there's still plenty of time left.
Still plenty of time left, but coach, that 5-year rule, no coach or quarterback has won a Super Bowl past their fifth season together. I'm fearing the Bengals may be the latest example of that.
Well, you know what? It's there. It's happened before, and it's probably going to repeat itself.
Better late than never. All that and much more coming up on the Bengal Squad Show.
Good day. It's the Bengals Squad. Everything Cincinnati Bengals every week. Breaking down all the big hits and game-changing plays from the Queen City. The way only the Locked On Podcast Network can. From the jungle to the playoffs, the Bengals Squad Show starts now.
It's week 3 of the offseason. It's offseason show number 5. Welcome to the Bengal Squad Show on the Locked On Bengals YouTube channel. Bengal Squad is the twice-a-week supplement to the daily Locked On Bengals podcast, hosted by Jake Liscow and James Rapine. I'm Alex Frank, joined by Jake and Coach Art Valero for Bengal Squad, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Locked On Podcast Network is the #1 sports podcast network in America and the world. For more on how to become a member of the Everydayer Club, visit lockedonpodcast.com/everydayer. Gentlemen, we got a great show today. A lot of great stuff to get to today. Joe Burrow and Zac Taylor are going into season 7 together, and that's great for continuity. But when you think about what these two have been through together the last 3 seasons, all that went down this year, 2024, the slow start, eventually culminating in 4-8 going into December, and then 2023 even they were 1-3. I just get a sense that after the Super Bowl in 21, the AFC Championship game the following season, did these two maybe peak together early? And I just wonder if they're ever going to be able to get back to the magic they created in those 2 seasons. What do you guys think as we sit on the early stages of the offseason that, as Joe Burrow says, as big as it gets for the 2026 edition of the Cincinnati Bengals?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult in the NFL. I think you see that, for example, with Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills. It's really hard. Everyone has the same goal. Everyone's trying to win a Super Bowl, and it's really hard to get back there. We'll see that with the Chicago Bears and Ben Johnson. Can they get back there the way that the Bengals were able to get back there in 22 after 21 and haven't been able to do it since for different reasons, between Joe Burrow's health and the sudden collapse and continued downward trajectory of the defense? It's just really hard to get back. That doesn't mean it's impossible. Just because things have never happened in the NFL doesn't mean that they never will happen. It might mean that it's rare. It might mean that you're looking for an outlier, and that's probably the case. The Bengals have never won a Super Bowl. Does that mean they never will? Maybe. You're probably looking for an outlier year for the Bengals to get there or something to change. But that idea that just because something hasn't happened before means it will never happen again, obviously there are new things happening in the NFL every year. Every year we get. This is the first time XYZ thing has happened. So it doesn't mean it's impossible, but there's obviously a lot of work to do. And that is what's ahead of this team more than, what the history and the trends say about these sorts of things.
Yeah, there is a lot of work to do. And, Coach, for as much as continuity is great, at the same time, when you see all these great quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes, who's won 3 Super Bowls, he's evolved his game. Andy Reid has evolved as his head coach and offensive play caller. You look at what Josh Allen did or has done over the last few seasons and the way he can run the football. You look at all these great quarterbacks that are evolving. Joe Burrow is too, but I just wonder if Zac Taylor is the right head coach for him in that continuation of his evolvement. What say you?
Well, I think that at this point in time, after 7 years, Zach is kind of Joe's safety net. He knows it's the same system. It's the same system of football, from the team's approach to offensively the approach. And so if you aren't pushing the envelope every year, trying to get better, bringing in new people that have different ideas, it's hard because you stay status quo.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where a lot of coaches, I mean, you look at it and it's to me as a former coach, it's really hard to bring in and change quarterback systems over and over again because they never really get comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Quarterbacks are system players. And when they're in a system, they become very comfortable. They become very relaxed. They've run the plays over and over against the variety of looks so the reaction times can get better. Now, you bring in a new coach, he calls what you call an apple, he calls it an orange. There's something in there in the translation that he has to evolve to, and then it gets stale. But you know what? Unless I'm not in the room, but unless the Bengals are constantly getting stimulation on the offense, it's a good offense, but it's almost too good right now. They need to evolve and evolve Joe Burrow. And you know what? His injuries, where the other quarterbacks haven't had them, his injuries have slowed his progression down.
Well, I'll say this for the Bengals coaching staff and the development on the offensive side of the ball. I recently had a conversation with someone who would know about the division of labor in the Bengals offensive coaching staff in particular. And the addition of pass game coordinator, ironically, Justin Riscotti, has gone a long way in terms of developing the running game, which is why it's ironic. He has an offensive line background. He had that kind of like hybrid background where the Bengals hired him as a pass game coordinator, but he was an offensive line guy when he was coming up, and he's really contributed in the running game. In the year after Frank Pollock, where Frank Pollock had that run game coordinator title and there wasn't a lot of room for new ideas outside of what Frank Pollock brought to the table, it was much more collaborative in 2025, and we started to see the run game really coming along, especially in the second half of the season, as Scott Peters' development and teaching started to take hold with the offensive line. We started to see him teaching wide zone a little bit differently, and the Bengals finding some success with different run game concepts. And so I will say that based on my understanding of the post Frank Pollock era in Cincinnati, especially in the run game, you saw a lot more collaboration from guys like Riscotti. The running backs coach, Justin Hill, had a lot more say. Casey, the tight ends coach, had a lot more say in things. Dan Pitcher and his ideas in the run game led to the Bengals evolving the run game in 2025 in a way that I just wanted, as you're talking about it, Coach, and the need for that constant stimulus and the constant evolution, they did get some of those things in at least some areas because of the change in the way that the Bengals attack the run game this year in particular. That it's just interesting that you bring it up because I had this conversation literally yesterday and learned a lot about some of the differences in the way that the Bengals put their run game together in 2025.
I love hearing that. And I think it's interesting because when you think about a coach like Justin Riscotti and the way the Bengals ran the football last year, which was really great to see, Chase Brown from week 7 on, you could argue was you could say was one of the 5 best running backs in the NFL. So sometimes I think when there's a lot of losing, unfortunately, going on within an organization, the wheel of blame it spins faster, and you forget that there are some really smart coaches within this organization, in the room, on the coaching staff, guys like Justin Riscotti. And then you think about Zac Taylor and Dan Pitcher and how instrumental they have been in Joe Burrow's career. For as great as Joe Burrow was when he came out of LSU, there was no definitive guarantee he was going to be this really great quarterback. Now, Joe Burrow is that, but at the same time, Zac Taylor was instrumental early on in his career. I mean, in year 2 together, they went to the Super Bowl. In year 3, they were like one play away from going back there the following season. So he has been really good for Joe Burrow. So has Dan Pitcher, quarterbacks coach his first 4 seasons, offensive coordinator last 2. But I just wonder, when it comes to Dan Pitcher specifically, and Jake, you and James talked about this earlier this week on Locked On Bengals, Dan Pitcher potentially not returning to the Bengals, maybe leaving now for another offensive coordinator role. And I just wonder, James wrote about this on All Bengals at Sports Illustrated, is the fact that Dan Pitcher wants to be in a position where he can call plays offensively. That's fine. But it goes back to, I just wonder if Zac Taylor maybe weren't so set on being the offensive play caller. He's been that for 7 years. And I understand it may be a low priority for some. You've mentioned that yourself this offseason, but I just wonder if where there needs to be change so you can keep continuity. Maybe that's where Zac Taylor needs to realize, if I don't give up calling plays, I could lose Dan Pitcher, and then who knows who's going to walk in at offensive coordinator. Could it be Brian Callahan? Sure. Could it be Joe Brady? Sure. I mean, you don't know who it's going to be. I just wonder if that has something to do with Joe Burrow and Zac Taylor being together, and maybe them, unfortunately, and I'm not going to say it's Joe Burrow, because Burrow, I think, is going to have a great season next year as long as he stays healthy. I just wonder if those two together are going to start to decline even more in 26 because of some of the changes that aren't being made. What do you guys think?
I think it's hard to make.
You know what? I think that I'm sorry if I cut.
That's all right. Go ahead, Coach.
I'm having a tough time hearing Jake, by the way. I think that probably as instrumental in Joe's progress is Dan. You know, he's been with him for 7 years. He was his position coach. He's the earpiece going between player and head coach, and play caller is the quarterback coach. And I know that as valuable as he is, you certainly don't want to let somebody like that get out of the building. And what do you have to lose at this point? You can always take it over after 8 games. You can always take it over after 4 games if you don't like what you're seeing. As long as Joe Burrow feels comfortable with how Dan Pitcher would call the game, let it eat.
I'll just say this from, I mean, we had this conversation, 2 weeks ago, right, Alex? We had a long topic on this show. We had a full segment on Zach giving up play calling and all these things. There's a few possibilities here. One, I think it's possible, I'm not saying this is the case, I'm speculating that ownership wants Zac Taylor to call the plays, that ownership sees 16 open offensive coordinator jobs around the NFL this year and the turnover that happens around the NFL, and thinks, why would we change the voice in Joe Burrow's ear? When Joe Burrow has been out there at quarterback, this offense performs at a high level. And people don't like to credit Zac Taylor for that because Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins exist. But those things do go hand in hand. They have built this offense around Joe Burrow and Joe's preferences. This is very much a Joe Burrow offense. You see how it changes when Joe Burrow isn't in there at quarterback. When it's Joe Flacco at quarterback or Jake Browning at quarterback instead of Joe Burrow, the offense does look a little bit different, for better and for worse. So I do think that losing Dan Pitcher would be a bad thing for the Bengals. There's no doubt about that. I think Dan Pitcher is a good coach. I also don't know that changing the play caller makes a huge difference. And this is going to be an unpopular take perhaps, but I still think Zac Taylor is actually a good play caller. I think, going back to our conversation a couple of weeks ago, if it gets you an advantage in other aspects of managing your team on game day, and you don't have a fall off in play calling by changing the play caller, then it's something that you could consider. But again, I'm not sure that it isn't ownership's preference to have the continuity and say, you know what, the reason we hired Zac Taylor to be the offensive minded head coach is so that we could sustain what we have on offense that has been working. The offense is not the problem. And yeah, they could finish games better. Don't get me wrong. They're not perfect. But the bigger problem facing this team right now has been on the defensive side of the ball for the last 2 years.
You're absolutely right. And again, I just wonder if Zac Taylor giving up play calling would allow him to see the issues that are really on the defensive side of the ball. D'Amico Ryans, and I talked about this on a previous show, he called the defense in Houston when he first got there, but when he felt like he was in a sufficient enough position, he gave up defensive play calling. Now it's Matt Burke, defensive coordinator, at least this past season, and D'Amico Ryans is now, like the field general, focusing on all aspects of the game. So
when we talked about that last week, we can also look at all the coaches that are still in the playoffs. Sean McVay calling plays for the Rams, Mike McDonald calling plays for the Seahawks defense, Sean Payton calling plays for the Broncos offense. And if we go back to last week, Kyle Shanahan calling plays for the 49ers, Ben Johnson calling plays for the Rams. And so there is a large representation of play caller head coaches that have gone deep. You have to be good at it, but if you're good at it, that seems to be a pretty good answer, just looking at the teams that are currently succeeding in the NFL.
Coach, what do you think?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. I'm having a hard time hearing Jake.
So Jake is saying that Zac Taylor, the fact that he has been able to call plays and do it at a good enough level where there are head coaches in the playoffs still that are calling plays. So we have seen that it can work. And so maybe Zac Taylor can remain the offensive play caller, but there still needs to be some involvement in all facets of the game.
Well, it's funny you say that because they're all from the same tree. they're all
True.
all a part of the same tribe. The Kyle Shanahan, the Sean McVay tree that they trickle down, and all of a sudden then you throw Ben Johnson in there after only being his first year. There's going to come a point in time. Those guys, they don't want to leave what they know. But the one thing that they have that I don't believe Zach has is he does not have a team around him in terms of players on both sides of the ball, nor does he have a staff that he feels very, very comfortable with, that he can just say, okay, that side of the ball, you go do you, we'll do us, and in the middle, we're going to win games, and I'll coach the team. And I don't think he feels totally comfortable with that, and he's not going to let something get away from him that he's got control of.
Yeah, and that's where the continuity aspect comes in, but it also comes with, yes, what works is good, but at the same time, involvement matters in the NFL. The great organizations are the ones that do it the best. The Chiefs, the Bills, the Ravens, the Patriots. I mean, you can even say the Niners and Kyle Shanahan, the Houston Texans, even to a degree, have evolved. That's where it gets tricky. And I just wonder if there's too much of continuity. They have to change in some aspects. And it's going to be very interesting if Dan Pitcher does leave for an offensive coordinator role somewhere else. I don't think he's going to leave for a head coaching role now. As James wrote, the idea of him going to the Browns to be their head coach, I feel like, has come and gone. So now it's if he's going to leave to be an offensive coordinator. And if he does, do the Bengals go back to Brian Callahan? Do they bring in Joe Brady, which I think a lot of Bengals fans would like the idea of that? At the same time, is that what's best? I'm not sure, but that's a conversation for a future show. Coming up, Joe Burrow's prime. Obviously, the last 3 years of it have not been what Bengals fans were hoping for. We'll talk about how it relates to a move that was made yesterday by a rival quarterback and his organization. We'll talk about that coming up next right here on the Bengals Squad Show. This edition of the Bengals Squad Show is brought to you by Indeed. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. If you're hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. So let's say I need to hire someone else for this show. We got a great group already. I'd go straight to Indeed and be very specific about what we need. We need real experience. We need passion, not just a resume buzzword. Instead of struggling to get your job post seen, Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps your listing stand out and reach quality candidates faster. Sponsored job posts boost your post to the people who are the best match for your role, and that makes a real difference. So, according to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed are 90% more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs. So spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. This edition of Bengal Squad is also brought to you by Robinhood. What if sports were traded like markets? Now you can put your sports IQ to work in real time with Robinhood prediction markets. It's not you against the house. It's you participating in a live market. You can buy or sell your positions live all game long. Use your sports knowledge in the moments that matter. Robinhood prediction markets changes the game. It's people moving the action. So when momentum shifts, you can move with it. I always knew the game, but never had a dynamic way to apply that knowledge. Now I can actually take part live in a market powered by people. You're no longer just a spectator. Play by play. You decide. Trade every play with Robinhood, now available across the U.S. Download the Robinhood app now to begin. Futures and cleared swaps trading involves significant risk and is not appropriate for everyone. Event contracts are offered by Robinhood Derivatives, LLC, a registered futures commissions merchant and swap firm. Welcome back to Bengal Squad here on this Tuesday, January 20th, the day after the Indiana Hoosiers. Congratulations to them winning the college football playoff national championship. Coach, just how impressive is this turnaround by head coach Curt Cignetti at Indiana?
Huge. It is. I mean, to see that what happened yesterday, and actually all 16 games they played this year is phenomenal. You know, it's going to be tough to defend, but at least for a year, you don't have to. You are the national champs, and you keep moving forward.
Jake, when you see Indiana and Curt Cignetti and the way he leads, does it make you, as it relates to the Bengals, does it make you think about if the right people are in this room in what is supposed to be the prime of Joe Burrow's career?
I don't often draw those parallels between college coaching staff changes like that and the NFL, but I certainly acknowledge that what Curt Cignetti did at Indiana is one of the most impressive coaching jobs we've seen in any level of football, probably in my lifetime. I mean, really, really impressive job by Cignetti. As far as what's going on with the Bengals, I guess I've just kind of moved on, to be honest, Alex. Like, the coaching staff is going to be in place, and we talked about the opportunity the Bengals had to make those changes. They didn't take the opportunity. We talked about why we think the Bengals did it. And at this point, with Zac Taylor returning, my focus personally has shifted toward what can they do? How can they attack this offseason? How can they figure this thing out? Because at this point, you know, we've talked the Zac Taylor thing so much, and he's not going anywhere in reality. And so at some point you have to look forward.
Yeah, and you bring up a lot of points there that I want to touch on in this segment, because at the end of the day, as fans, we root for the players to win games. Players are ultimately the ones that are going to decide whether or not a team wins games. And so for me, I go back to 2022 when the Bengals lost the AFC Championship to Kansas City, and Joe Burrow was talking to, I forget if it was Tracy Wolfson or Evan Washburn after the game. And he said, and I believed him, and I think a lot of us did, he said that he felt like the organization was headed in a positive direction, a good direction. He liked where the organization was headed. Unfortunately, the last 3 years, when, again, the 2023 season was derailed when Burrow got injured in week 11 and was out for the season after that. But at the same time, the last 3 seasons, what they have become are seasons that were filled with high expectations. And then by the time we get to Thanksgiving, the wheel of blame is spinning so fast. And I always say this, the wheel of blame has no landing spot. So for once, I just ask, and again, Jake, you're right, the coaching staff is in place. We can kind of move on from that, even though we will still talk about it because that's what fans want us to discuss. And we do these shows for the fans. I just think that for once, I want there to be complete alignment in the organization, ownership, coaching staff, and players. And I do think there is alignment between the coaching staff and players. I do think there is that because there was improvement in key areas this season. Maybe not a lot, or as fans would have liked, but there was improvement on the offensive line. There was improvement on defense in the second half of the season. But coach, as you know, there has to be alignment at all 3 levels of the organization. Can the ownership, which has done a lot of things better in recent years, fine, but there still needs to be improvement. Can they, for once, with a quarterback that is absolutely capable of winning a Super Bowl, and the Bengals have not had that quarterback since at least Ken Anderson, if not Boomer Esiason, Carson Palmer, maybe that. But this is different, it feels like. Joe Burrow is different. He's built different. Jake mentioned it earlier on the show. He's an outlier because he's come back from so many injuries. But, Coach, that's where organizational alignment has to, for once, be there and not be a distraction and talking point during training camp where it should be the ramp up to what should be a very good season. Is that accurate?
I would say true. That's absolutely true. You know what? I think that at this point in time, everybody knows, what kind of player Joe Burrow is. And they talked about, hey, okay, we're going to build this thing. We're going to build it around him. Don't wait a minute. There's more around him than just 2 wide receivers. You know what? You have to spread your wealth and your love on both sides of the ball to create a team. And they always seem to be a day late in terms of their addressing the situation, especially the last 3 years. Now, granted, he's got to stay healthy, but you look at it, he's 7 years in the league. He's been hurt a numerous amount of times. You have to, and it's taking you this long to protect him so he's not getting hit, because the pressures are as good as a sack. Those unnecessary hits take their toll. And I think that right now they're not in line. I think the players are with the coaching staff, and you can see it because no one has quit. All right. But you don't hear from the other side, so you don't know. You don't know who to put your questions towards.
Let's relate this with the Bengals, the state of the Bengals, to the Buffalo Bills. So Sean McDermott is fired yesterday, Monday, which I will admit I was surprised. I thought it could happen because the Bills have come up short in the playoffs so many times straight. But think about this. The Buffalo Bills have a quarterback who, like Joe Burrow, is all-world talent. Josh Allen is that. He's arguably the best player in the NFL right now, and I would argue that myself. But the Bills have decided to move on from a guy Allen was very familiar with. Coach, he's won 98 games in 9 seasons with the Bills. You can't do a lot better than 98 wins in 9 years. But again, the Bills, this goes back to a point, Jake, you mentioned last week, other organizations in the NFL will move at different speeds for better or worse than the Bengals. And the Bills, in the middle of Allen's prime, they are making a change because they believe they need to get another head coach in the room to get them over the hump. So I ask you, Jake, how does this relate to the Bengals deciding to keep Zac Taylor after 3 straight non-playoff seasons, whereas the Bills, who have won a playoff game in 6 straight seasons, are making a change at head coach?
Yeah, it's 6 seasons of the Bills falling short in different ways, and the Bengals have fallen short. Look, I think we've talked about this enough that people know. I would have moved on from Zac Taylor this year if it were me making the decisions. I would be doing a lot of things different than the Bengals front office does things. But as you compare it to the Bills, and you can go to the Ravens or the Pittsburgh examples as well, these are a bunch of organizations that have moved on from very entrenched and successful head coaches, but have kept their front offices intact. In fact, Brandon Beane gets a promotion. And one thing that we've talked about with Zac Taylor and the Bengals and Duke Tobin is I would like to see these guys coupled at this point. Duke Tobin got to hire his head coach in Zac Taylor. Those guys have been linked from the moment Zac was brought into the building in Cincinnati. And the discussion has long been about the alignment between GM and head coach. And Duke Tobin, I know, not an official GM in Cincinnati, but I would like to have, I think we would have all liked to have seen that be done. But I think linking those guys together at some point makes sense too. And it's interesting that you're seeing teams move on from head coaches and not their front office staff, because for the Bills especially, there's such a failure by Brandon Beane to put together an adequate team around Josh Allen, much like you would argue about, even the Chiefs. I know that they've been in the Super Bowl, but as recently as last year, but the decline of the Chiefs roster texture in general exists as well. And it's something that they're now contending with to try to keep things going with Patrick Mahomes. The Bills need to do better around Josh Allen. And I think that you would make those arguments for a number of front offices that have remained intact. So I was surprised to see how little front office turnover there was this year. There's a really interesting point that I saw from Jake Rosenberg, who used to work in the Philadelphia Eagles front office. That would have been on Monday, where he said, it might be hard to believe, but ownership often lacks a great feel for what people actually do in their roles, what drives success, and what distinguishes the best teams. The people they often lean on often have agendas or lack true insight. So I think that this is a problem that we've talked about in Cincinnati for decades too. A lot of this goes back to ownership figuring out the right buttons to press at the right times too, and figuring out what those solutions should be and having a clear mind in doing so, especially because so many of these owners, I would say probably all of them, they're mostly not football people. They're
No.
people that are coming from other professions where they've become billionaires in order to afford a football team, and these are the people pulling the strings. And so it's complicated from top to bottom. Is, I guess, the bottom line here.
Look, and we're getting into that right now because when you're an organization that unfortunately the Bengals are historically a losing organization, they went 31 years without winning a playoff game. So unfortunately, because of that, when the Bengals aren't very good, that's where fans are going to go and they're going to start talking about, and then we start talking about it to give them our perspectives. And it's maddening. Like, it should not be this way. And you bring up a great point, Jake, about coupling head coach, general manager, or whoever is pulling the strings when it comes to roster construction. Coach, I'm going to give you an example. Your old rival, the Atlanta Falcons, this offseason, what did they do? Fired their head coach, Raheem Morris. Raheem Morris is widely respected around the NFL. They fired their general manager, Terry Fontenot, who had been there for years. What did the Falcons do this month so far? Well, they hired Matt Ryan as their president of football operations, and that move has been met with extreme positivity. And what does he do? His first big decision, hiring a head coach, goes out and gets a two-time coach of the year and Kevin Stefanski. So the Falcons now, they have completely turned the page. Now, they don't necessarily have a quarterback set in place. Michael Penix Jr. has talent. I'll give him that. But at least you look at an organization like the Falcons that are pivoting to a new direction to win championships. That stuff matters. Coach, I'm going to ask you this because you came to Tampa Bay in 2002 with John Gruden the year after Tony Dungy left, and it's because the Buccaneers needed to get over the hump. Were there any conversations about that going into the 2002 season where you guys did ultimately win the Super Bowl?
You know what? That was never mentioned, although everybody in the building knew the reason why. And John he brought fire. He brought a new fuse that was lit from day one. And, we started out, our first OTAs and our first opponent was our defense. And we're in an all-run period, all run. And what does John do the first play of the game? He runs a naked bootleg. And so got the defense upset, offense was fired up, and the war was on. And we started to compete until we were able to bring it all together in training camp. And so I've been on both sides of those things, where all of a sudden they brought in John to get the Buccaneers over the hump because the defense was built. The defense was already built. It was offensively, where they had a tough time. Now you look at the other coaches, there are three coaches out of the league that were either stepped down or fired, and they have over a 62% winning percentage. That's a lot of games that you're willing to send down the road where they have won. And I don't know, and the people that were hired since, with the exception of John Harbaugh, the other two, they have below 50% wins. So you're exchanging the known for the unknown. And if you feel it's your football team, so you can do whatever with whatever you want. Just be careful what you wish for.
You and I had this conversation yesterday when we were talking about Sean McDermott being fired. And I know you've talked about this when it came to John Harbaugh and Mike Tomlin. Maybe it was time to move on. And a lot of Bills fans comments that I've been reading on social media have felt the same way. But when a lot of them are also saying, why didn't Brandon Beane get canned or whatever? That tells you that there's something else wrong deeper within the organization. Now, personally, if Brandon Beane were the Bengals general manager, I'd love it because I think while, yes, Jake, his rosters have not been adequate enough, they've been good. I mean, there's a reason that Bills fans, when it comes to Thanksgiving, early December, the last two seasons are talking about division titles and who they want to play or don't want to play in the playoffs. And the Bengals are, well, we're talking about, well, they need to do this, this, and this, and it's mostly win out. Like it does make me think about that. Now, I will say this, when it comes to the AFC, the fact that the Bills and the Ravens with MVP quarterbacks have made changes at the head coach. And now the two longest tenured head coaches in the NFL, or in the AFC, excuse me, are Andy Reid with the Chiefs, who will be in year 14, assuming he's back next season, which I haven't heard anything to suggest he won't be, and Zac Taylor, who's going into year 8. Now, it goes back to Duke Tobin when he said that we've done it before. Yes, you have done it before. You have beaten the Chiefs in the AFC Championship. You've gone toe-to-toe with them twice. You can keep saying that all you want, but when other teams are trying something different, and yeah, coach, they are testing the unknown, and that's what they're getting into. But at least teams are trying other ways to win, and the Bengals may win next year. They may win next year. But they're not trying anything different, and that, Jake, is something that personally I have an issue with. When the last 3 years in Burrow's prime, when Josh Allen's prime has been successful, he hasn't won a Super Bowl, hasn't been to one, but at least the Bills are trying to give him chances to get there. I just wonder if Bengals ownership is once again not hitting the right buttons, as you say, when they need to, and are going to be too late to the party once again.
Yeah, there's a real chance that they are. We've seen them do it before. I'm sure as long as this ownership group is around, we'll see them do it again. We'll see what the offseason brings. The only other thing in my mind about this that's been percolating a little bit lately is the last time there are 2 times that I felt like there was an offseason like this, maybe 3, where Bengals fans were just so upset that, everything was kind of kept in place and retained and everything. One of those was before 21. The Bengals go to the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
One of those was when the Bengals kept Marvin Lewis after the Carson Palmer thing. And because this was before when I was in this industry, I checked out. It was 2010 or whatever it was, right? And then the Bengals draft Andy Dalton in the second round. I'm like, all right, cool. They drafted a second-round quarterback. Who cares? It's not going to do anything. And then they made the playoffs 5 straight years. They didn't win in the playoffs. They had their issues there. They had a really good team in 2015 that they obviously were set back by Andy Dalton's injury that year. But there are a couple of times in recent Bengals history that I've been thinking about where it's like, man, there is a really good argument that the Bengals need to move on from their coach. And then they go out there and win the next year and exceed expectations. They also kept Marvin too long after 2015, obviously, and maybe they would have won with AJ Green and Andy Dalton in those cores with or without Marvin Lewis. We'll never know. But it's just a thought that has occurred to me lately that every now and then in recent Bengals history, there's been all this outrage about keeping a coach in place, and then they've gone to exceed expectations the following year. So anything can happen in the NFL, very much a year-to-year, week-to-week league, a lot of parity in place. And I think there's a long way to go this offseason before we have fully shaped opinions about our expectations for this team in 2026.
One key theme about that, and as we saw in the playoffs this week, those teams that don't learn from history are destined to repeat it. And that will lead into our next conversation about the 5-year rule as it relates to Joe Burrow and Zac Taylor and why winning a Super Bowl together may have sailed past them. We'll talk about that next right here on the Bengal Squad Show. Today's edition of the Bengal Squad Show is brought to you by Drip Drop. So kicking off the year feeling good is the goal, right? And honestly, hydration is the easiest win. Here, I'll show you. When I stay on top of it, my energy, my focus, and my mood, they're all leveling up. Let's be real. Plain water doesn't always cut it. This isn't plain water, especially when you're grinding through long days, hitting the gym, or just trying to stay consistent with your health goals. That's where Drip Drop right here comes in. It's doctor developed. It's proven fast hydration that helps your body and mind work better. So think clearer focus, better energy, elevated mood, even that fresh skin glow. Who doesn't want that? So I've been using Drip Drop as part of my daily routine. I started it during the holidays. It's honestly a game changer, and not just for workouts, but every single day. I love that it uses a precise ratio of electrolytes and glucose for rapid absorption, delivering 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of leading sports drinks. And It tastes amazing. I'm obsessed with every flavor. 16 of them, original flavors, 8 zero sugar options to choose from. Drip Drop science-backed formula is trusted by firefighters, medical professionals, and over 90% of top college and pro teams because it rehydrates you faster and more effectively than water alone. They have flexible subscription options, so you're never stuck with it, whether you're hitting the gym, juggling work, or just staying consistent with your goals. Right now, Drip Drop is offering podcast listeners, Bengal Squad listeners, 25% off, 20%, off your first order. So go to dripdrop.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL. That's dripdrop.com, promo code LOCKEDONNFL for 20% off. Stock up now at dripdrop.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL. A reminder, if you want to become a member of the newly established Everydayer Club of the Locked On Podcast Network, go to lockedonpodcast.com/everydayer to learn more, where, among other things, you can get access to the members-only Discord. Back on Bengals Squad, the twice-a-week supplement to the daily Locked On Bengals podcast hosted by Jake Lisco and James Rapine. Coach Art Valero with us on Bengals Squad. I'm Alex Frank. So I'm not sure how much you guys buy into the 5-year rule. That there was, I remember exactly where I was. Jake, I think you may have actually posted something about this. I was in a hotel in St. Petersburg, Florida, visiting my sister that weekend. She just moved down there. So I was there. The Bengals were playing the Chargers that weekend. I don't like remembering that game. It was a Sunday night game. They should have won. This was 2024, November. And I remember being in the hotel lobby and I saw this thing called the 5-year rule. And the stat is no head coach and starting quarterback have won a Super Bowl past their 5th season together. Some won it in their 5th seasons. Flacco and Harbaugh, Peyton Manning and Tony Dungy, they all won it in their 5th season, so they got theirs. But no other head coach quarterback tandem has won a Super Bowl past their 5th season. When you guys hear that, and as it relates to Joe Burrow and Zac Taylor, you start thinking what?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that has been around for a while. I think it could end up being true for the Bengals. That could end up being how it plays out. I think that it is a pretty significant year for Zac Taylor, now knowing that, in fact, 2026 will be the year in which he has 1 year left on his deal, 2027, and not 2 years left. You see around the NFL, and Green Bay is the latest example of this, coaches don't like going into that lame duck year. I don't think ownership likes coaches going into a lame duck year, meaning the final year of a contract and just playing it out and seeing what happens. Typically, very cute as your dog makes a guest appearance.
My dog is wanting to join in the conversation. Go ahead.
The typical history is what it is here. I would throw this one caveat out there. And I'm sure this has happened for other head coach quarterback combos too, but how do you count it when the quarterback has missed a bunch of time? How do you count the 5 years exactly when the quarterback hasn't played 5 full years? Is that something that we should consider as a mitigating factor here or not? I don't know. I don't know how much predictive determinism this particular statistic has, because like I said earlier in the show, new things happen in the NFL every year, but again, you're talking about an outlier, and you can certainly see that being the case for the Bengals, that they just held on to Zac Taylor too long.
Yeah.
And maybe we end up looking back on this period in 5-10 years and really regret it. But I don't know the future that well. I can't predict it that well quite yet.
If only we could.
I just, could probably say what I've said before today is that, I would have moved on from Zac, but now that he's still around, I'm just looking for ways to make it work. And waiting to see what's going to happen before I set my expectations for 2026.
And it puts the onus on the front office. Coach, when you got to Tampa Bay in 2002, could you sense that there was something like an elephant in the room of, hey, we need to get over this hump. We need to win a Super Bowl because you don't know when you're going to get another really good chance.
You know what? We didn't. We were challenged coming in, challenged by the defensive players. They knew they were good, and they knew they had to get over the hump, and that the only way, deep down inside, they understood that it was going to take an offense to help them get over the hump. And John kind of reversed it. he said, don't worry about the offense. And we weren't good for a while. We weren't good for probably 5 games. And we finally came into our own and started winning help winning some games.
Mhm.
But he challenged the defense right away. He brought the big 3 in and said, hey, get me 9 turnovers for touchdowns. Something was unheard of. The defense took that. That was a challenge for them against who's this guy? And they ultimately went out and got it, and we won it as a team. So, there wasn't that necessarily that drive. It was like now or never, but we just took one game at a time and just went out and played.
This next point I'm going to make is it's going to really pull on the heartstrings here when it comes to being a Bengals fan. But the night of Super Bowl 56, after the game ended, and as crushing as it was so easy for me, Jake, maybe you, James, any Bengals fan to think, okay, we waited so long to win a playoff game. We weren't supposed to go to the Super Bowl this year. We were this close, 3 points against a really great defense in the Rams. And Sean McVay, their head coach, is going to be in the Hall of Fame one day. I'm convinced of that. If you would have told me that night that the Rams would be in the position they're in right now, and the Bengals would be in the position they're in right now, I'd be like, dude, the Rams just wasted their entire salary cap basically to win the Super Bowl. I shouldn't say wasted their salary cap. They used it all to win the Super Bowl. Somehow they've recovered from that. They're playing to go to the Super Bowl again on Sunday, which we'll talk about in our final segment today. And then the Bengals haven't made the playoffs in 3 straight years. It makes what happened that night hurt even more. It's harder to stomach knowing that you're right there. And it's so easy to say, well, Joe Burrow's great. He'll be back there. Dan Marino was great. He never got back. Brett Favre only went back one time after he won the Super Bowl in 1996. So it just, you really start to think more and more of the missed opportunity that was there that night in LA, and understand that with the way the Bengals are run and the changes that they haven't made and the things they do and don't do, it just makes you really wonder about, man, did they miss out on it? And seeing what the Rams are doing and how they navigated through their, organizational adversity, it hurts. And look, Stafford and McVay got theirs in year one. They may get another one this year. There are other head coaches and quarterbacks who have gotten theirs. Mahomes and Reid got theirs. Hurts and Sirianni got theirs in year 4. So it really, really puts into perspective this 5-year rule. And it puts into perspective, I think, Jake, I'll turn to you here because salary cap better than I certainly do. It's the fact that when Joe Burrow was on a rookie contract and they had all this talent and they could accumulate it all, it was all fun and games. But ever since Burrow signed his extension, the front office has not done an adequate enough job of putting a team around him. And now that 5-year rule really, really comes into play. And when you think about Joe Burrow's prime, it all goes back to, are the right people here to ensure that trend can be bucked and the Bengals win the Super Bowl this year or next year or at some time if Zac Taylor's still here past his contract?
It could happen. I think the front office certainly needs to do business differently. I'm not going to sit here and say I think the Bengals are going to win the Super Bowl in 2026. Like I said, I don't have any takes yet about what I think this team is going to do next year. The offseason is going to play a big part in that. One thing we talked about on Locked On Bengals this week, I think on our first show of the week, was a desire to see this front office be a little bit more aggressive with their salary cap and maximize their resources a little bit, because there are a bunch of salary cap space listings out there right now that put the Bengals in the top 10. But by the time all these other teams do all their restructures and extensions and cap cuts and everything, the Bengals are probably going to be in the top half of the NFL in cap space, but their number isn't going to change the way a lot of these other teams are going to create space and push the envelope a little bit for their roster. But ultimately for the Bengals, this is now 3 straight quarterbacks where they haven't been able to put it together around those quarterbacks on their second contract, which I think is more than enough to call it a trend. And Duke Tobin has overseen all of those quarterback tenures in Cincinnati, from Carson Palmer to Andy Dalton to now Joe Burrow. And there's just a need for it to be better. A lot of that is maintaining your aggression in free agency, finding the fits in free agency year to year. And a lot of it is the draft, man. You talk about the Rams and what the Rams have done since their F that picks moment in the draft since then. They got Kyron Williams in the 5th round, Quentin Lake in the 6th round, Kobe Durant, who was starting for them on Sunday, in the 4th round in 2022. In 2023, they have 14 draft picks. They got Steve Avila, Kobe Turner, Warren McClendon, Puka Nacua, all guys that are starting for them and are huge players that are part of their success. Braden Fisk, Jared Verse in 2024, Cam Kinchins, I think he might be hurt right now, but the success that the Rams have had in drafting and developing throughout the draft, not just in the 1st round, not picking in the top 10, despite having limited resources in some of these years. A lot of credit to that front office for finding ways to find players, and that coaching staff, and the coaching staff that has had a lot of turnover and continuing to develop guys. And for the Bengals, it will take both. They need to be better in the draft at finding players. They need to be better at development. Hopefully we're seeing some signs of that with some of these coaches, certainly on the offensive side of the ball. And they need to get back to what got them there the last time, which is being a little bit more active in free agency to find ways to create some strengths on your team where you don't have them on the defensive side of the ball.
And coach, again, it all goes back to, that's a great point, Jake. It all goes back to this organization. When they do things one way and it works, great. But when it doesn't, you have to pivot. And this organization still has not done that. And that's where Bengals fans are frustrated with a quarterback who's in his prime, but maybe the window, while it could open again this year, it doesn't necessarily feel like it's wide open like it was a few years ago.
No, you know what? And when Les Snead, they won it. They had their downtime. You got to remember, Sean McVay was ready to retire. He had been burnt out with the team. With a team 2 years later or 1 year later that just kind of fizzled
1 year later
because they ended up spending the bank on winning a Super Bowl, which they did. Great for them. They've done it before. In the history, the Bengals haven't done it before because they did it once. Why haven't you done it the last 3 years? It didn't take that long for the Rams to do it. It shouldn't have taken you that long, and your salary cap wasn't what the Rams was at that time. So, you know what? It's, you can use all the rhetoric you want. The great thing about this game is it's a show-me game, and the fans don't want to hear all the excuses and everything else. Just go give me a product. Let me cheer for you. Let me root you on. Show me what you've got. Show me who we are, and I will be more proud of you by showing me that, and give me something in January that I can be excited about.
It's a show me league, and it's a what have you done for me lately league. That is so true. Speaking of Sean McVay and the Rams, what a win for them at the divisional round weekend. Plus, I'm going to hold Coach Valero accountable for a prediction he made that sounded great at the time, but early on Saturday night, it didn't look that great. We'll get into that conversation next, right here on the Bengals Squad Show. I think Coach knows what I'm talking about. Today's edition of the Bengals Squad Show is brought to you by Home Chef. As the new year gets going, a lot of people are trying to simplify their routines, just like Al Golden simplified the defense in the preseason last year. And dinner is a big one. Between busy work days, cold winter nights like the one right here in Cincinnati, and packed schedules, having an easy, reliable dinner plan like the stroganoff I'm going to have tonight makes a huge difference. And that's where Home Chef comes in. Home Chef takes the stress out of cooking by delivering fresh, pre-portioned ingredients right to your door with easy-to-follow recipes that actually taste great. They're rated #1 by users of other meal kits of quality, convenience, value, taste, and recipe ease. And it's easy to see why. Meals come ready to fit your schedule. 30-minute recipes, oven-ready trays, or quick lunches. There's over 30 weekly options, including family-sized meals and different dietary choices. Recipes are simple, but they feel elevated, even restaurant quality. Who doesn't like that? With dishes co-created by chefs like Gordon Ramsay. Who doesn't like that? Everything arrives pre-portioned, so there's less prep, less mess, and no wasted food. Save time and money. Home Chef customers save an average of $86 per month on groceries. For a limited time, Home Chef is offering listeners of Bengal Squad 50% off your first box, free shipping, and free dessert for life. Just go to homechef.com homechef.com/lockedon. That's homechef.com/lockedon for 50% off your first box, free shipping, and free dessert for life. Must be an active subscriber to receive free dessert. That ought to make you a subscriber. All right, Coach, I got to ask you to start this final segment. So you picked the 49ers on Friday, and you sounded pretty convinced. At what point in the game did you say to yourself, yeah, I don't think I got this one right?
Opening kickoff. I could have said when they got off the bus, but right away, it was a different environment. They, minus Kittle, minus, McCaffrey for that matter, he got a stinger, and they were outclassed in Seattle, and it did not take long.
41-6 final score. Jake, what was your big takeaway from the divisional weekend?
My biggest surprise was honestly Patriots-Texans, that CJ Stroud went out there and laid an egg like he did again. Yeah. I thought the Texans defense could have kept them in that game. I thought they should have kept them in that game, but CJ Stroud just couldn't do anything with it. The other one is the Broncos winning. You guys probably remember me being sick of the Broncos for whatever reason. They're now without Bo Nix, but the fact that was a game in the fourth quarter with all of the issues that the Bills had in that game, all of the turnovers the Bills had in that game. That's why I don't really buy the Broncos. Yeah, the Broncos ended up winning. The Bills ended up making too many mistakes. Josh Allen choked, in my opinion. I don't think he played a very good game. Had the game-winning touchdown. He went 0 for 3 with a 1st and 10 in the low red zone with a chance to take a 2-score lead in that game. Didn't get the job done. The Broncos tied the game. And again, a chance to win it in regulation on the following drive. Airmails Dawson Knox on what would have been a difficult throw, but certainly a throw that he could have made. That was pretty surprising to me as well. But the Seahawks on the other side, I thought the 49ers could have given them a game, but I continue to be very impressed with Mike Macdonald. Excited to see Mike Macdonald and Sean McVay in the NFC Championship game this weekend. That should be a fun matchup.
That's going to bring back memories of Coach in 2010, Week 17 against the Rams for the NFC West title. Only this time it's for the Super Bowl. So, or it's to go to the Super Bowl to represent the NFC. I'll say this, and I know we talked about them in the last segment. I will never again question Sean McVay and Matthew Stafford and their credentials to go into Chicago and not only win. It's one thing to win that game. It was cold. It was snowing. Soldier Field was raucous all night. The one thing that impressed me the most was you think about the play Caleb Williams made, which if the Bears win that game, you're seeing that play on every single edition of SportsCenter this week, probably every single edition of every live show on NFL Network.
But you know what that reminded me of? You remember the deep ball from Joe Flacco to Jacoby Jones on the right sideline against the Broncos in like 2012 or whatever, 2013, whenever that was.
Mile High Miracle
reminded me so much of that play where the DB just looked like there's no chance this ball should be completed. And then it is. A bit of a more difficult throw for Caleb Williams, the 52-yard fadeaway versus Joe Flacco in a muddy pocket stepped into it a little bit, but was really reminiscent of the Mile High Miracle for me, that Caleb Williams throw.
I love that comparison. And then to be able to, you have to punt on your first possession of overtime if you're the Rams. The Bears get a 4th down conversion. All they have to do is basically, not turn the ball over, and they're probably going to get a game-winning field goal. And, Coach, they do. And not only that, but, Jake, you mentioned him in our last segment, Kobe Durant, 2 picks on Sunday, 1 on the first drive of the game, another one in the second half. It's that why right there, the LA Rams, their coaching and Matthew Stafford's quarterback play, that throw to Devontae Adams he made in overtime is one of the best throws he's ever made. And, Coach, you look at that NFC Championship game, we'll talk about it more on Friday in our final segment then. That is going to be the ultimate chess match between a high-octane Rams offense and a Seahawks defense that is playing with sky-high confidence.
Yeah. I tell you what, both sides of the ball on both teams. This is going to be a slugfest. Well, first of all, this is round 3 for them, for each of them. You know what? They played each other 3 times, 1 on the road, 1 at home, and now you go back to Seattle. You know what? It is going to be – and they're very familiar with each other. as everybody else is in the NFC West. It's going to be an exciting contest to see the advantage. I tell you what, 12th, they're going to get the 12th man up there rocking and rolling like it was the other night. And I tell you what, that could be Beast Mode 2 with a quake the size of, something we don't even feel here in Southern California.
Wow. How much of a chance do you guys give Jarrett Stidham and the Broncos on Sunday against the Patriots?
I mean, that's going to be a defensive issue, right? Can they get Drake May to make some mistakes? Can they capitalize on some turnovers? I'll believe Stidham can pull a Nick Foles when I see Stidham pull a Nick Foles, but I loved Nick Foles' tweet.
Oh, that was hilarious.
That's an all-timer. Nick Foles
Yeah.
taking to social media to say what he said about the Patriots. That was a good one.
Coach, did you see that tweet Nick Foles posted? He says, he said on Sunday night, "I hear the Patriots have struggled against backup quarterbacks in championship games before, and you know exactly which game he's referring to when he played against them in Super Bowl 52.
That is funny.
How about that?
Yeah,
How
that's
about that?
great.
Nick Foles. Hey, you want to talk about a guy that never has to buy a drink or a cheesesteak in Philly ever again? That's Nick Foles. All right. I'll say this, Jake. I know you mentioned Texans, Patriots, CJ Stroud. I was wondering if they were going to bench him for Davis Mills in the second half, truthfully, because of the way that game was going. Houston could have won that game very easily. The Patriots, they made some big plays. Kayshon Boutte's catch was insane. It was a tremendous catch, but Houston had so many chances to win that game. Go ahead.
We just saw, I was just going to say, we saw so much terrible quarterback play for a divisional round of the playoffs. Like,
Yeah.
It doesn't happen terribly often, but Bo Nix might have had the best performance out of any court. And I just talked all that crap about Bo Nix last week, but like CJ Stroud was terrible. Matthew Stafford delivered in the clutch, but got away with some stuff, man. And I don't know if he's going to get away with that against a much better defense in Seattle. Drake May played one of his worst games of the season. Brock Purdy had no chance. Caleb Williams was very up and down, obviously through the 3 picks, was airmailing footballs all over the place. Quarterbacks are going to have to step it up this week, or we could just see this continuation of the pendulum swinging back toward defense, right? You're seeing some defensive coaches getting hired around the league a little bit more. You've got a really good chance of, for the first time since Bill Belichick, I think, a defensive background head coach winning the Super Bowl this year. You might end up with a defense on defense background if it's Vrabel and Mike McDonald. So we'll see what happens in these conference championship games. We could be seeing the pendulum swinging both toward the NFC and toward defensive head coaches.
Of the final or of the 4 head coaches that have been hired so far, there are 4 of the 10 teams with open head coaching spots. 4 teams have hired head coaches. Only 1 is an offensive-minded head coach, and that's Kevin Stefanski. John Harbaugh, special teams background. Robert Saleh, who the Titans hired at the 11th hour last night, essentially. Defensive coordinator, and then Jeff Hafley going to the Miami Dolphins, defensive coordinator from Green Bay. So just something very, very interesting point you bring up there, Jake, swinging back to the defense. And 10 years later, it's still Patriots Broncos in the AFC Championship. And it's very tough to win in this AFC. You and James talked about it. I mean, the AFC for the better part of this century has been run by a select few teams, and some other teams have broken through like the Bengals, but that just tells you how hard it is to win and how much defense still wins championships. Jake, as always, it is great to have you on the Bengal Squad show. You and James are back tomorrow on Locked On Bengals, Thursday and Friday as well. Coach, you and I are back on Friday for the second edition this week of the Bengal Squad show, where we will discuss potentially the Bengals having retained Dan Pedro's offensive coordinator, or if they're looking for a new offensive coordinator. We'll get into that conversation, plus a conversation about a player that is very polarizing. He's very up and down, but when he's on, he could be an integral part of this offense. We'll talk about that and also give our picks for Conference Championship Sunday. Jake, I know you're going to be on assignment Friday. Who do you got in the Conference Championship games this week?
I like the defensive matchup in the Super Bowl.
Okay.
I like Vrabel overcoming the backup quarterback. I like Mike McDonald. I think there's too much firepower on that Seattle defense. But if anyone's going to get it, there's all that familiarity Coach talked about. That'll be a really fun one. I'm really looking forward to the NFC Championship game.
How about that? Yeah, so am I. Coach, you and I are going to have our picks on Friday when we tee it up again here on the Bengals Squad Show. He's Jake Lisco at Jake Lisco, Coach Art Valero at Arthur Valero 54. I'm Alex Frank at Frankie_Natty. Thank you for listening to the Bengals Squad Show, the twice-a-week supplement to the Daily Lockdown Bengals podcast, hosted by Jake Lisco and James Rapine on the Lockdown Bengals YouTube channel and wherever you listen to podcasts. Lockdown Podcast Network has become the #1 sports podcast network in America and the world. And for more on how to become a member of the Everydayer Club, visit lockdownpodcast.com/everydayer. For Jake and Coach Art Valero, I'm Alex Frank. Thanks for listening to Bengals Squad. We'll talk to you on Friday right here on the Lockdown Podcast Network, your team every day.